So Donna Palomba is a nationally recognized speaker, author, and advocate for sexual assault survivors. Following a harrowing home invasion and sexual assault in 1993, Donna faced further victimization when the police department mishandled her case. Her extraordinary strength, perseverance, and leadership brought meaningful change to both police policy and Connecticut state law. Inspired by that famous quote by Gandhi, and deeply affected by her own experience, both personally and professionally, Donna went on to form the national nonprofit organization Jane Doe No More in 2007. Donna now empowers people to fight back against injustice and to become the change they wish to see in the world. So please welcome to Justice Southbury, President and founder of Jane Doe No More, Donna Palomba.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. May I ask, by show of hands, how many of you have heard of Jane Doe No More? Great, I appreciate that. So I also want to mention that Anna Bauer Richardson, Rick's daughter, is on our Jane Doe No More board, and we just love having her. She's such a young, articulate, energetic woman, and our board is growing, and we're very excited. So I'm going to take you back to my personal journey and what led me to form Jane Doe No More. In 1993, my husband and I were married for 12 years. We had 2 small children. My background is in design. I was a partner in a marketing agency. My husband was busy in the insurance business with his 3 brothers, but life truly centered around our children. And it was a Friday evening. My husband was away for the first time in our marriage overnight. He was out of state. And the children and I came home after a long day. I did the regular routine, put them in their PJs, said their prayers, tucked them in. They were in their separate rooms, and I was in our bedroom. I awoke to footsteps. I was sleeping on my stomach, and I just remember hearing these footsteps, and immediately I became alarmed because it didn't sound like little children's bare feet. I turned and I looked up and I saw a shadowy figure. There was a man wearing a mask entering my bedroom. I screamed. He covered my mouth. I bit down on his hand, and while I was, coming to my senses, I realized the only people who are going to hear me are my little children, and I didn't want to involve them. He put a pillowcase over my head. He bound my eyes. He tied my hands behind my back. He cut my clothing, and he raped me. I did not think I was going to survive. He put a gun, I felt the barrel of a gun to my mouth, and I literally felt like my head was on fire. He moved the gun from my mouth to my temple, and I thought, this is it. And I imagined my children finding me. I saw my life flash before my eyes, and I just said out loud to God, please absolve me of all my sins, and I waited. After a time, he flipped me over onto my stomach, and he put the gun into my back and said, if you call the pigs, I'm going to come back and kill you. His words. I then thought, okay, he might let me live, and I just said anything I could to will him down those stairs. I said, this is between you and I have no idea who you are. I could never identify you. I'll never tell a soul you didn't hurt me. I was just saying anything. And miraculously, I heard him walk down those stairs, and I heard him shut the door. I was disoriented on the bed, as you can imagine, still bound. But of course, my first thoughts were of my children. I was able to wriggle free from the binds. I ran down the hall, first to my son's room and then to my daughter's, and they were untouched. I just knelt down and sobbed and thanked God. Honestly, I went from unimaginable terror to survival instinct to gratitude. At that moment, I was so grateful that the children were untouched. And I knew at that moment that if I had survived and they were untouched, we were going to be okay. So in a state of shock, I ran to the bedroom phone, and this, remember, this is 1993. I did not have a cell phone. Not many people did. So I picked up the phone, and it was dead. And I went down to the kitchen and picked up our second landline, and it too was dead. And that's when I realized the perpetrator must have cut the phone lines. I had no way to communicate with the outside world. It was like the most, it was horrific. And I was, again, in a state of shock. I made a very difficult decision after checking on the children multiple times that I had to get help. So I secured the home, made sure the children were safe. I knew the perpetrator had left. I grabbed a key to the home, locked it up, and ran to the closest neighbor with lights on. And he took one look at me, and I knew him. His name is Cliff. I didn't realize it, but I still had the nylons around my neck and wrist that he had bound me with. And he said, "What happened?" I quickly explained, "John is away. I've been attacked. The children are by themselves. He left, and so he immediately called 911. He knew that I was afraid for the children, and I didn't want them left alone. He went instinctively down the basement, grabbed an axe, and signaled to me while I was on the phone with police that he was going to go up to the house and wait for the police there. The police assured me that someone else would be coming for me at the neighbor's home. Yes, an officer did show up, and he said, "Do you have a key to your house?" And I said, "Yes," and I was following him, and he said, "You have to stay here." And I said, "But my children, please, I need to be with them." And he said, "No, someone will be here for you. You just need to stay here. I'm going to the house." So of course I had to obey, and I stood there in this kitchen that was foreign to me. I used that time to call my family members from the working phone, and I told them, "Please, something horrible's happened. I'm okay. The kids are okay, but I need you at the house." And family members were starting to arrive at the house. I was still waiting at the neighbor's house, which was like 5 homes away, and finally, I couldn't take it any longer. The separation anxiety was, and I was so afraid that law enforcement was going to scare the children. So I actually grabbed a knife in their drawer and ran back up to my house in my bathrobe. And by that time, there were officers, there were family members, and unfortunately, the crime scene was not secure. We were walking all over, and they were asking me questions. But the miraculous thing is the children remained asleep. They did not see a police officer. We made arrangements that the family members would carry them down to my mother-in-law's home, which was walking distance. So I went to the hospital, and law enforcement, I went in private vehicle, law enforcement followed me there. I had a sex crimes kit conducted, DNA from the perpetrator was found. At that point, my eye was bothering me terribly, and it turned out I had a scratched cornea from the struggle, so my eye was patched. There were lacerations that were noted on my wrists, and I went home to my mother-in-law's home. I didn't want to go to our home where my children were. And then the next day, we had to break the news to my husband, who was coming home. He was absolutely devastated. But I assured him that I was okay and that the children didn't see anything. We just said that there was a funny smell in the house, and that's why you're going to go to Grandma's. So we tried to keep things as normal as possible. I was actually back to work after a couple days. I loved my job. I had, the support and love of my family, of my colleagues, and I was well on my way to healing. 1 month after the crime, and this was in Waterbury, I should have mentioned that earlier, it was in Waterbury, Connecticut, the lieutenant in charge of my case put me in a small interrogation room in a small office, and he hit the tape recorder. Back in those days, it was reel to reel, if you remember, 30 minutes on each side. So he hit play and record, and he began by pulling out a small white piece of paper and reading me my Miranda rights. And I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "This is the way I'm going to handle it. Why don't you tell me what really happened that night?" I said, "Please, I've done nothing but tell the truth. You have something terribly wrong. Why are you doing this?" And unfortunately, of course, had I known then what I know now, I would never have sat there, but I sat there while he abused me verbally for an hour. He told me I had everything to lose, my children, my husband, my career, my reputation, if I didn't tell him what happened that night. I said, I told you what happened. I told the officers there that night what happened. All to no avail. He said he had countless interviews and photographs that proved that I was lying. I said, please show them to me, because I did nothing but tell the truth. It didn't matter. The room started spinning. At one point, I was nauseous and I was sobbing, and I just said to him, what could you be thinking of doing this to me? He looked at his watch and he said, I'm thinking of what I'm going to have for lunch. It was so horrific. Finally, I didn't know what to do. Finally, he said, I'll let you leave under the condition that you come back here this afternoon, you tell me what really happened, and this tape goes in the drawer and the case is closed. Or I will find you, I will arrest you, and your photograph will be in tomorrow's paper. He said, because one way or another, I have 27 cases, this case is getting closed today. I felt worse then than I did the night of the crime. I was at a vulnerable stage in my healing when he did this to me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I came home, I told my parents, my husband was dropping our son off at kindergarten. He came back, my father and husband were down at that police station within a half hour demanding to see this lieutenant. They weren't even given the courtesy of being brought in an office. In the middle of a busy hallway at the Waterbury Police Department, my husband and father were told her story is full of holes, and yes, there is a threat of her arrest. They came back and told me that my poor husband, who I'm still married to, who we both love each other very much, had to ask me, he said, is there anything at all that you need to tell me? And I said, no. He said, I just had to ask because of what he said. I'm so sorry. And we just hugged each other and cried. And we were thrown into a world we knew absolutely nothing about. We were raised, as I'm sure many of you, with the utmost respect for law enforcement, that they're there to protect and serve and help you in your time of need. We sought legal help because this was way out of our league. And we demanded that an internal affairs investigation be conducted, because at this point we knew they weren't looking for the perpetrator. They had a magnifying glass on me, and I had done nothing but tell the truth. During the discovery process, we found out that someone in Waterbury, who had been an informant before, went to this lieutenant, and we have it as in a deposition. He said, I heard something about the Palomba case. I heard it may not have gone down the way she said. I heard she may be having an affair, and she concocted this rape to cover up an affair while her husband was away. It was so easily disproved. It was completely untrue. It was ridiculous. But rather than this lieutenant do his work and find out how I lived my life, talk to my friends, talk to anybody, talk to my coworkers, find out if this had any validity, he took this ridiculous rumor and he used it as fact to try to break me. And honestly, had it not been for my strong faith and family, he may have succeeded. But I was so blown away by this whole thing that as I was gaining strength, I learned more about these crimes. I learned that every 68 seconds, someone in America is sexually assaulted. And every 5 minutes, that person is a child. And I thought, I never even used the word rape until it happened to me. It wasn't something that I ever talked about. It was just, something that happened to others. But it made me realize how prevalent it was and how misunderstood it is. And so when the Internal Affairs report came back 1 year later with a simple paragraph stating that the officer that did this to me, it was a proper investigative technique given the circumstances. The only thing that he was reprimanded for is that he said that unfortunately he hit the tape recorder to the wrong switch and none of it was recorded. Mind you, he was in charge of technology at the Waterbury Police Department. It was like a gut punch. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. So with my attorney's help, we filed a lawsuit. Now, when you sue the police, you're actually suing the entire city. They're employees of the city. And it's this whole thing about ministerial versus, discretionary. I'm not a lawyer, but so it was going to be very difficult to prove. My attorney told me that, going into it. But I thought, we have to do something. I could not imagine someone that was younger than me that did not have the family support and the help that I had. How could you get through this? I mean, I could have easily spiraled downward. So I was determined. It took 7 years to go to trial. 7 years. They tried to stop me at every turn, but I used that time. I actually didn't trust anything that the police department did, obviously. Dr. Henry Lee, who some of you may have heard of, he was an internationally renowned forensic scientist. I reached out to him. He didn't know me, and he resampled the DNA in my case. And then I worked with the Connecticut Sexual Assault Crisis Services and others to create policies that needed changing. And at the very top of the list was every victim should be treated with dignity and respect. And that internal affairs investigation shouldn't be conducted by your peers and other logical things. So the trial, we were told in the fall of 2000 would begin in January of 2001. 2 weeks before trial, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It thankfully was stage 1, but we made a careful decision with my doctors and with my attorney that it was better for my mental and physical health. I had worked so hard for these 7 years to prepare for trial, to get the witnesses, the people lined up and depositions and all of that, that we decided to go forward with the trial. And I would then subsequently have a lumpectomy and radiation therapy. And that's what happened. The trial lasted for 1 month. 1 month. There were 2 female defense attorneys that questioned everything from my motherhood. The 911 call is recorded. It's out there. In my shock, when I was trying to relay information from a neighbor's house, I said, the gentleman that did this to me, he had gloves on. When I bit down on his hand, I could tell. I'm trying to give them information. And these attorneys said, can you imagine using the word gentleman to describe your... No, you couldn't, because I was in a state of shock, not thinking. And other ridiculous things. One officer wrote a report. He was there that night and saw me. And he wrote a report to the lieutenant. And it said that she was wearing the nylons around her neck and wrist as if they were a stage prop. Now, on the 911 call, the officer that I was speaking to said, do not remove anything, do not wash. And I was simply complying. The weight was dripping off of me during that trial. The weight of the cancer. But every day, my husband and I would walk in there with my parents and friends, and we were determined to get through it, but it was so difficult. Officer after officer swore to tell the truth and then spewed out these ridiculous lies. But finally, Dr. Henry Lee took the stand. He talked about the proper handling of a crime scene, how the entire perimeter should have been cordoned off, how forensics should have been called in, and fingerprints and photographs taken, none of which was done. And then Dr. David Johnson, who I sought help from the Post-Traumatic Stress Center, took the stand, and he was an expert witness, and he said that I am a strong person and I was well on my way to healing, and I likely would have just had short-term PTSD had it not been for the actions of this lieutenant and others, and that I do have complex post-traumatic stress for the rest of my life. And he said that the way I was treated was in many ways more damaging than the rape itself. And then Neil O'Leary, who you probably know the name, he was mayor of the city of Waterbury. Prior to that, he was on the Waterbury Police Force, going up through the ranks. He dared to go against his fellow officers, and he dared to tell the truth. And he got on that stand and said there was never one shred of evidence to prove that she had done anything but tell the truth. And finally, those officers were found negligent. And that was the beginning of an amazing turnaround of events. Of course, here we are, 7 years later. Neil O'Leary never forgot. He was now chief of police. In 2004, a man in Waterbury attacked a co-worker. He tried to rape her. She was able to break free. At the time of the arrest for unlawful restraint, the man's name is John Regan. They asked him for a voluntary DNA sample, and he complied. We would find out 2 months later it was a perfect match to the DNA in my case 11 years earlier. This man was leading a double life. He was thought to be a happily married, church-going father of 3 from a prominent family. He had grown up with my husband since kindergarten. They played football together in high school. We went to each other's weddings. It was devastating. The betrayal my husband feels to this day is just unbelievable. He was afforded the best attorneys that money could buy, and he was out on bond. He was out on $350,000 bond for 1 year. For 1 year, we were living in the same city. I did not know if he was going to come back and kill me, as he threatened to that night, or if my husband would find him and the rage and anger would take over. He actually crossed state lines and went to Saratoga Springs, New York, and sought his next victim, a 17-year-old track star, Lindsay. She had parked her car in the parking lot at Saratoga High School, and he had his van right next to her. She, when she came out of practice, went to open, but she had to actually shimmy because the van was so close to her. He opened the van door and grabbed her around the torso and the mouth and tried to pull her into the van. Thankfully, she was very strong and she was able to break free, and she screamed. 2 coaches that were in the area heard her cries. 1 got in the car. In the meantime, John Regan just says, "Shut up," goes back in the car and in his van and starts driving. He's now driving on the streets of Saratoga. Thankfully, the coach caught up with him. They pulled him over. The back seat had been pulled out. There was a tarp, a noose, a sedative, a syringe, $2,500 in cash, pictures of the victim that he had tried to rape in Connecticut here, a picture of me, and pictures of women he had been stalking in Connecticut and New York, unbeknownst to them. That's what it took to finally put John Regan behind bars. And I should mention, in my case, even though we had irrefutable DNA evidence, in 2004 when he was found, he could not be arrested for rape. The only thing we could, because there was a statute of limitations that had run out 6 years earlier. It was maddening. He could only be arrested for kidnapping, which had no statute. But it was going to be, again, with the attorneys he had, it was going to be very difficult to prove in court. But, we were absolutely determined. And so this journey for justice really spurred in me a desire to do more. The more I learned about these crimes, the more disturbed I became. I mean, I believe these types of sexual crimes are the most misunderstood and therefore underreported, because you hear every day victims finally get the courage to come forward and then they're re-victimized. Maybe not in the way I was, but just you have to understand that we're victims of trauma, and to be believed and to have someone support you and say, "I will help you," that means the world. And when you have someone that just says, you don't talk about that, or "I don't believe you, that was so long ago, why are you telling me that now?" It completely devastates that individual. So Jane Doe No More was born from that experience, and I just have the passion to do so much more. I started the organization in 2007. Our mission is to empower survivors of sexual crimes to find their voice, like I found mine. And inevitably, it advances your healing. And then we go on to educate others. And it's very powerful. And it's never easy. I've told my story, I don't even know how many times. And it doesn't get easier, but I know I'm helping to educate others. And that makes such a difference. And that's why we do what we do. So in that same year, I went to Hartford and advocated for a change in the law, and I'm happy to say that my case was the impetus for the removal of the statute of limitations on sexual crimes with DNA. So that's a win for victims from 2007 going forward. But honestly, these types of crimes, we have now survivors on our team. We have over 55 survivors, and most are victims of child sexual abuse that they didn't even know what was happening to them until decades later, when they were finally able to process it and say something. And there was no recourse. There was no path to justice. So we believe that these types of crimes should not have a statute of limitations at all, period, with or without DNA. Of course, you have to prove that it happened, but at least have the opportunity to pursue justice in some fashion. So Jane Doe No More's, we're trauma-informed, we're survivor-led, so all of our survivors that are part of our team, and mostly volunteer, we are in the schools. We're teaching everyone in age-appropriate language. We have a program called our Safe Student Initiative, which begins in 5th grade all the way through college, and we talk about healthy relationships versus unhealthy. Even little things can mean a lot. You can, to trust your gut. And so even if it's someone that's sitting too close to you and you feel uncomfortable, we want to give these kids the confidence to say, you know what, could you mind sitting a little bit farther away? The world isn't getting any safer. We need to build self-esteem and confidence to be able to speak up and do something about it. We then, in the older grades, we talk about consent, how, consent is so important. In verbal and nonverbal cues, you need a resounding yes in order to get true consent to go forward. And if someone is intoxicated, they are incapable of giving consent. If someone is under the influence of drugs, they're incapable of giving consent. If someone is under the age of 16, they're incapable. So, you need to understand these things. I don't know what she was saying, but anyway. Well, that could throw you. So, at any rate, and we talk about the digital world, which is another layer of complexity where predators can pretend to be someone else, and now with the AI technology and all of that. All that to say is we all can play a role in educating people about sexual crimes. We also offer self-defense classes for women and girls ages 12 and older, and it's always at no cost to participants. All of our programs are at no cost to participants. And I know someone mentioned they heard me speak at the Woodbury Women's Club years ago. We speak at Rotaries, at women's clubs, at men's, Knights of Columbus. It doesn't matter. Everyone needs to hear this message, right? And so it's just so important. We have a website. We're on social media. We have our website is just janedoenomore.org. There are some business cards here. There's also a book, Jane Doe No More, that I wrote with an investigative journalist, and he talks about the whole journey through an investigative lens, and then at the end of each chapter, it's my perspective as a victim growing to be a survivor. And it truly is the most rewarding work I could be doing. So I do a lot of creative design work, but it's for Jane Doe No More. I do that full time now, and I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to talk to you here today and to everyone. And I'm just an ordinary person who faced extraordinary injustice and chose to do something about it. And sometimes we cannot help what happens to us, but we can choose how we want to react to it. Yeah. And I applaud all of you for doing what you do every week here. We need more good people to make a difference. So thank you so much. I also want to mention that we do have a candlelight vigil, as Rick mentioned, April Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we're closing it out on April 30th on the Naugatuck Green at 7 p.m. It's just a 1 hour, we're going to do a candlelight vigil. A couple of survivors from our team will speak, and then we'll just light candles and just remember those who still have not found their voice. And again, I think it's the most misunderstood and underreported crime, and we can all make a difference. So I appreciate your interest and support, and you could follow us on social. Please check out our website. We have a whole calendar of events. We do a gala, who I know some people have been to in the spring. We have a golf tournament for men and women coming up on September 30th, and we have all kinds of events in between. So just again, thank you for your interest and support, and thank you for what you do.
What is the date for your candlelight vigil?
It's Tuesday the 30th at 7.